So, how did we get from early Hollywood's darkest, most tragic secrets all the way to the G, PG, and R ratings we see every time we go to the movies? Well, it's a wild story and it's all connected. Let's dive in. Here's how we're going to break it all down. We're going to trace this whole chain of events, starting with some really tragic personal stories that basically threw the country into a panic. From there, we'll see how that led to this super strict censorship code, how that system eventually fell apart, and what kind of legacy it left behind for us today. And this quote really hits the nail on the head for where we're starting. It's not just about a few sad stories. It's a cautionary tale, right? About what happens when you have this immense power and ambition without any real checks and balances. And that was early Hollywood in a nutshell. All right, so let's set the scene. We're in the 1920s. Hollywood isn't just a place, it's a machine, a factory churning out movies. And the stars? They were the most valuable products. But the thing is, they were often treated like they were completely disposable. Okay, take a look at this. This is Wallace Reed, and his story is the perfect example of this crazy double life. To the public, he was the screen's most perfect lover. Handsome, athletic, the whole deal. But in private, it was a nightmare. He had a severe morphine addiction that made him irritable and withdrawn, just a completely different person. And the studio? They knew all about it, and they actively worked to hide it, all to protect their bottom line. And you can see just how fast it all happened. It's shocking. In 1919, he gets hurt in a train wreck. A studio doctor gives him morphine for the pain, to keep the movie on schedule. By 1922, just 3 years later, he's collapsing on set, his weight has plummeted, and the addiction has taken over. A year after that, he's dead at 31. This was a horrifyingly fast spiral, and it sent absolute shockwaves through Hollywood. And Wallace Reed wasn't a one-off case. Not at all. Let's talk about Elma Rubens. She was a huge star. A natural talent, beautiful, rose through the ranks in the 1910s. She was starring opposite the biggest names like Douglas Fairbanks and pulling in up to $3,000 a week, which was an insane amount of money back then. She was at the top of her game. And then, you guessed it, it's the exact same tragic story. A studio doctor prescribes morphine for some ailment, and that one prescription spirals into an addiction to both cocaine and morphine. She died at just 33. You see the pattern here, right? The studio system itself was creating the conditions for these tragedies, acting as the enabler every step of the way. So with huge stars like Reed and Rubens dying so young and so publicly, along with a ton of other scandals hitting the papers, the industry had a massive problem on its hands. We're talking about a full-blown moral panic across the country. Hollywood was suddenly seen as this den of sin. You had religious groups and reformers all pointing their fingers at the industry's jazz age lifestyle. And the headlines were relentless. Murder, sexual assault, overdoses. It got so bad that by 1921, lawmakers in 37 states were trying to pass almost 100 different censorship bills. The studios saw the writing on the wall. They realized if they didn't police themselves, the government was about to do it for them. And their solution? It was something called the Motion Picture Production Code, but everyone just calls it the Hays Code. And this thing was an iron-fisted set of rules that would basically dictate every single thing you could, and more importantly, could not see on screen for more than 30 years. It was self-censorship on a massive scale. So what did this code actually do? It wasn't just about suggesting they, tone it down a bit. No. This was a list of hard don'ts and be carefuls. Things like nudity, interracial relationships, making fun of religion, and, get this, any depiction of illegal drug use were completely forbidden, a direct response to the scandals. And then you had the be carefuls, where things like adultery were allowed, but only if the characters were brutally punished for it by the end of the film. It was all about enforcing one very specific, rigid moral worldview. Now, for a few decades, this system seemed totally bulletproof. But by the late 1940s, you start to see these cracks appearing, and they were coming from a few different directions all at once. Okay, to understand how the whole system eventually crumbled, we have to go back in time a bit. We need to look at the legal decision that made the Hays Code possible to begin with, and it all comes down to a 1915 Supreme Court case called Mutual versus Ohio. And the court's ruling in this case is, well, it's everything. The Supreme Court decided that movies were a business, pure and simple, and not a part of the press. And that little distinction is huge, because if it's a business and not art, it doesn't get First Amendment free speech protection. That one single ruling gave censor boards all the power they needed. Okay, so crack number one was economic. It came from a big antitrust lawsuit in 1948, US v. Paramount. The government basically broke up the studio monopoly. They forced them to sell off their movie theaters. Why does that matter? Because now independent theaters could pop up and show whatever they wanted, including foreign films or movies made outside the strict Hays Code system. The studios were losing their stranglehold. At the very same time, you have this political pressure cooker heating up. The House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, starts its infamous investigations into communism in Hollywood. This creates the blacklist, and suddenly, there's this intense chilling effect on any kind of political speech in movies. So you've got economic pressure, and now this new layer of political censorship. The whole system is getting squeezed. All of this pressure, the legal, the economic, the political, it created the perfect storm for a legal challenge that would finally bring the whole thing crashing down. And weirdly enough, it all centered on an Italian film called The Miracle. So here's what happened. New York state censors, who were still a thing, remember, banned the film, calling it sacrilegious. But this time, the distributor, a guy named Joseph Burston, he didn't just accept it. He fought back, and he took his case all the way to the Supreme Court. And what the Supreme Court did next changed everything. In a unanimous decision, they declared that movies are a form of expression, and they are included under the free speech protections of the First Amendment. Just like that, they completely reversed that 1915 ruling. The legal foundation that had propped up censorship for almost 40 years was gone. So, with this new First Amendment protection, the Hays Code was suddenly toothless. It was legally unenforceable. But, and this is the key part, that impulse to control and categorize movies, it didn't just vanish overnight. Instead of disappearing, the old system just evolved. It shapeshifted. The same organization that ran the Hays Code, the MPPDA, just rebranded itself. They became the Motion Picture Association of America, or the MPAA. And in 1968, they swapped the old code for the letter-based rating system we all know today. But here's what's so fascinating. When you look at the criticisms of the modern rating system, it's like an echo of the past. People complain about the process being totally secret, the board members being anonymous, a bias against indie films, and this weird inconsistency where sex is treated way more harshly than violence. Those are the exact same complaints people had about the Hays Code. The DNA of that old censorship system is still alive and well. Which leaves us with this final thought, right? The names have changed, the rules are different, we've gone from a don't list to a letter grade, but has that fundamental desire to control what we see on screen ever really gone away? It seems like that tension between art, business, and morality is still shaping the movies we watch, even today.